Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Mel Stride.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Mel Stride.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the proud father of 3 daughters, I'm sure that the entire House will share my deep concern for the more than 270 Nigerian schoolgirls held captive in that country. The only so-called crime which they face is that they aspired to receive an education. Would my right honourable friend set out for the House the steps that this government is taking to ensure that we help to ensure their release as soon as possible?
I know that my honourable friend speaks for the whole House and indeed the whole country. I'm the father of 2 young daughters, and my reaction is exactly the same as his and every father or mother in this land or in the world. This is an act of pure evil. It's united people across the planet to stand with Nigeria to help find these children and return them to their parents. The Foreign Secretary and the British government have made repeated offers of help to the Nigerian government since the girls were seized. I'll be speaking to the Nigerian President this afternoon and will again say that Britain stands ready to provide any assistance immediately that we can, working very closely with the US. We already have a British military training team in Nigeria. The Foreign Office has counter-terrorism experts, and we should be proud of the role we play in that country, where British aid is helping to educate 800,000 Nigerian children, including 600,000 girls. We should be clear, this is not just a Nigerian issue, it is a global issue. There are extreme Islamists around our world who are against education, against progress, against equality, and we must fight them and take them on wherever they are.
Mr. Speaker, let me begin by fully associating myself on this side of the House with the Prime Minister's remarks on the terrible situation in Nigeria. Mr. Speaker, on our proposal for 3-year tenancies in the private sector, can the Prime Minister tell us when he expects to make the inevitable journey from saying they represent dangerous Venezuelan-style thinking to saying they're actually quite a good idea?
Well, I haven't had the time to study the rent control proposals, but I'm sure he'll be able to lay them out for the House. Let me be clear about my view. If there is an opportunity to find longer-term tenancy agreements to give greater stability, a proposal made at last year's Conservative conference, then I'm sure we can work together. But if the proposal is for rent controls that have been tried all over the world, including in Britain, and have shown to fail, I think that's a very bad idea.
Even by his standards, this is a pretty quick U-turn, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the chairman of the Conservative Party, I know he hasn't got a briefing on this, but maybe you can listen to the question. Last week, the chairman of the Conservative Party was saying this was all back to Venezuela, completely wrong. But indeed, the Community Secretary has supported these proposals. Now, the question is, how are we going to make it happen?
I've got some very good briefing, actually, on these proposals from Labour MPs. Here they are. Right. Let's start with Labour's housing minister. You'd think she'd support Labour's policy. She says, I do not think it will work in practice. Then moving over to the Department for Local Government, where the Shadow Secretary of State says this: we don't want to return to rent controls because the rental sector is meeting a demand for housing. There we are. The authentic voice of Benism. Then we go to the head of the Select Committee, a Labour MP, the honourable member for Sheffield, and he said this: we concluded that rent control was not feasible. So there we have a Labour policy, completely unclear about what it is, but the one thing that is clear, Labour MPs don't back it.
All he shows is that he has nothing...
Order. I know it has to be said every week, but I'll very happily say it again. However long it takes, very simple exercise in democracy, the lesson should be learned. The question will be heard, and the answer will be heard. It's incredibly simple. Ed Miliband.
all he shows is he has no idea about this incredibly important issue facing our country. Let me explain to him. There are 9 million people renting in this country. Our proposal is to say there should be fixed 3-year tenancies as the norm for those people with predictable rent changes, right? That is the proposal. Now, many people across this country think this is for the first time a party addressing the issue they face. So can he explain what is wrong from going from 1-year tenancies with unpredictable rent rises to 3-year tenancies with predictable rents? Why has the Conservative Party given up on millions of people who are generation rent?
What we want to do is build more houses so we have a better rental sector with more affordable rents. But as I said to him in my very first answer, if this is about finding new tenancies that give long-term security on a voluntary basis, yes. If it's about mandating rent controls for the centre and destroying the housing market, no. Now, the problem I have with so many of his policies is they all come from the same place. They come from the Thank you very much, Len. They come from the Unite Union. The Unite said renationalise the railways. He wants to renationalise the railways. Unite says let's have old-style rent controls. He wants old-style rent controls. The problem with rent controls is their policies are for rent, their candidates are for rent, and their leaders for rent. That's the problem.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be as encouraged as I am that unemployment in my constituency is down by almost a third since the last election. However, Mr. Speaker, the future for almost 1,000 workers related to Eggborough Power Station in my constituency is less certain. Will the Prime Minister meet with me to ensure that we have a future for this very important asset in my constituency of Selby and Hasty? Thank you.
Minister.
I'm very happy to meet with my honourable friend and discuss this. It's welcome what he says about the fall in unemployment, which we're now seeing right across our country. In fact, employment is growing fastest, not in the southeast of our country, but actually in Wales. Shows this recovery is increasingly more broadly based. I know about the problems at Eggborough Power Station and the demand there for further action, as has been agreed at Drax. I'm very happy to discuss that with him and see what can be done.
Mr. Andy Slaughter.
I have 2 world-class hospitals in my constituency.
At the moment.
The Secretary of State for Health has decided that Hammersmith will lose its A&E this year, and the Charing Cross will be demolished, losing all consultant emergency services, including A&E and the country's best stroke unit. Will the Prime Minister stop his Health Secretary putting my constituents' lives at risk?
What we are doing in North West London is making sure the NHS is getting more money. It's going to be getting 2.4 billion this year, 74 million than a year before. That, if you remember, his own party's policy was to cut the NHS like they are doing in Wales. The changes that are being made in North West London are backed by clinicians and local people, and we want to see our NHS improve as it does under this government.
Sir Tony Baldry.
Does my right honourable friend agree that UKIP's policies are based on fear? Fear of the world, fear of foreigners, and that as a great trading nation, we should embrace the world. And if anyone comes to my constituency and goes to the hospital or to the nursing homes or to the farms or to the building sites, they will see the great contribution being made to our communities and to the growth of our economy by fellow EU citizens.
Prime Minister.
My right honourable friend is absolutely right that Britain has benefited from being an economy that is open to investment and open to people coming who want to contribute and work hard here. I agree with what he says about UKIP. So much of their view seems to be that we don't have a bright future in this country. I absolutely believe that we do. If we get our deficit down, we get our economy growing, we invest in apprenticeships, we show that we can be one of the success stories of the 21st century. We're making progress, and that is the way to challenge their worldview.
Mr. Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, there is deep concern in the British business and scientific communities about the proposed takeover of AstraZeneca by Pfizer. The deal would have an impact for decades to come on British jobs, British investment, British exports and British science. The Business Secretary said yesterday he is, and I quote, not ruling out intervention. What type of intervention is under consideration by government?
Well, I absolutely agree with what the Business Secretary said yesterday, but let me be clear that the most important intervention we can make is to back British jobs, British science, British R&D, British medicines and British technology. And that is why I asked the Cabinet Secretary and my ministers to engage with both companies right from the start of this process, and I make no apology for that, because we know what happens when you don't engage. When you stand back, just say you're opposed to everything, what you get is abject surrender and no guarantees for Britain. We're fighting for British science, and I just think it's a pity he's trying to play politics rather than backing the national interest.
Well, let me say first of all, Mr. Speaker, it's good to hear he agrees with the Business Secretary. Yeah. Now, the Business Secretary said this: one of the government's options will be to consider using our public interest test powers. Now there needs to be a proper assessment. There needs to be a proper assessment of this bid. And yesterday, as I say, the Business Secretary said he was open to doing this. This could be done straight away through this House, and we on this side would support making that happen. Will he agree to do it?
The assessment that I want is from the Business Department on this deal, or indeed, because there isn't now an actual offer on the table, any subsequent offer. And I will judge all these things about, does it expand British jobs, British investment, British science. But let me just make this point, because I worry it may be lost in this debate, is that, and I know, of course, he thinks he's extremely clever, and we all know that, but he may have missed this point. Britain benefits massively from being open to investment. Nissan is now producing more cars than the whole of Italy. Jaguar Land Rover, under Indian ownership, has created 9,000 jobs in the West Midlands since I became Prime Minister. Vodafone and indeed AstraZeneca have benefited from the backing of an open country to go out and build and buy businesses around the world. There's more inward investment into Britain today than the rest of the EU combined. Don't let's put that at risk.
No, Mr. Speaker, he doesn't understand. This is simply about something very straightforward: having an independent assessment of this bid and whether it is in the national interest. I want to ask him the question again, because it matters to people right across this country. Is he ruling out or ruling in using the public interest test on this takeover? We could make it happen. His Business Secretary could make it happen, and we would support it. If he does not take action now, and the bid goes through without a proper assessment, everyone will know he was cheerleading for this bid, not championing British science and British industry.
I think it is deeply sad that the Leader of the Opposition makes accusations about cheerleading when what the government was doing was getting stuck in to help British science, British investment and British jobs. And doesn't it tell you everything? That given the choice of doing the right thing for the national interest, working with the government, or making short-term political points, that is what he chooses to do. We might ask why the public interest test was changed in the first place. It was when they were sitting in the Treasury. Yes, they wrote the rules, they sold the gold, they saw manufacturing in our country decline by 1/2, and we will never take lectures from the people who wrecked our economy.
Will the Prime Minister confirm that under his leadership this country will never spend less than the NATO recommended minimum of 2% of GDP on defence?
Well, what I can say to my honourable friend is we are spending in excess of 2%. We're one of the only countries in Europe to do that. The Greeks, I believe, are spending ahead of 2%, but if I can put it this way, not all on things that are useful for all of NATO. We should continue to make sure we fulfil all our commitments in terms of defence spending.
Joan Whalley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister urgently meet again with me and with fellow MPs to find a way forward on consultant-led maternity services to be run by the University Hospital in Stoke-on-Trent?
Prime Minister.
Well, as the honourable lady has asked me, bright honourable lady has asked me about this question in the past, and I was very keen to make sure that in spite of all the difficulties at the Mid-Staffs Hospital, there was an opportunity to look to see if it would be possible to have a way for the long term of having consultant-led maternity services. People who live in our major towns, Stafford being a major town, want to be able to have their babies locally. And I think it's vitally important that we do that. I'm regularly updated by the Member of Parliament for Stafford, and I'm continued to be happy to meet with him and indeed a delegation of Staffordshire MPs if it is necessary to talk further about this point.
Margaret James.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, Boston Consulting Group published research that found Britain to be the #1 competitive manufacturing country in the whole of Western Europe, and #4 globally behind China, the United States and South Korea. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that this is just the sort of company we should be keeping, and further evidence that our strategy to rebalance the UK economy towards manufacturing and the West Midlands and other regions is working?
I'm grateful for what my honourable friend says, because for the first time in almost a decade, all three main sectors of the economy, manufacturing, services and construction, have grown by at least 3% over the last year. I think this is further evidence that the economic plan is working. Manufacturing is important in itself, but it's also important because so much of it is tradable, and we want to see Britain export more, make more, invest more. The moves made by my right honourable friend in the budget in terms of investment allowances and backing UKTI are very much dedicated towards that angle. But also, as I said earlier, we must remain the open economy that will encourage people to invest in our manufacturing base.
Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Later this week, the opening stages of the Giro d'Italia will take place in Northern Ireland, and along with the Tour de France coming to Yorkshire, these world-class sporting events allow us to showcase our region and boost the tourism and grow the local economy. But would the Prime Minister agree with me that as we seek to build a more prosperous and better future for all of our people in Northern Ireland, that it is vitally important that the suffering and hurt of the victims is never forgotten, and that whether it's 1 year ago or 10 years ago or 42 years ago, justice must be pursued and the police must be allowed to follow the evidence wherever it may lead?
Well, first of all, can I agree with the right honourable gentleman about the importance of these great sporting events, the one he mentioned in Northern Ireland, and also, of course, the Tour de France, which is going to be starting in Leeds, which is going to be a great moment for Yorkshire and for the whole United Kingdom. I think we should do as much as we can to promote these. I think we should probably draw the line at appearing in lycra at either event. He raises a very important issue about terrorist victims. We discussed recently the important issue about trying to secure greater assistance from Libya over Semtex, which is still being found in Northern Ireland as we speak today. And as for his other remarks, we should be proud of the fact that a free country has an independent judiciary, an independent legal system, an independent police service. They decide who to arrest, who to question, who to charge, and that's the way it must remain.
Paul Burstow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dementia is one of the biggest challenges facing our country. Will the Prime Minister join with me in congratulating the Alzheimer's Society and Public Health England in launching a major new campaign through Dementia Friends to raise awareness and challenge stigma? And given that 50,000 people quit their jobs to care for people with dementia, will he ensure that there is a new dementia strategy at the end of this year, because the current one ends this year, so that we can ensure people with dementia get the support they need?
No, I pay tribute to my honourable friend for raising this issue. We've turned the 0 on number 10 into the dementia flower today to help boost the importance of raising awareness about this issue and encouraging more people to be trained as dementia friends. I'll look at what he says about the strategy. As he knows, it's about investing in research and science, where we've doubled the budget for dementia. It's about dementia-friendly communities, and also making sure that our hospitals and care homes better treat people better with dementia. We'll carry forward all of those, and I'll perhaps write to him about the update to the strategy.
And Clwyd.
100,000 people are already dead in Syria. Others are dying as we are here today. They need help desperately. We've talked about humanitarian help. We haven't crossed borders. What on earth are we doing about it?
Mr.
Well, the right honourable lady is right to raise this. The answer to what we're doing about it is that Britain is the second largest bilateral aid donor in terms of humanitarian aid going into Syria. And so we are helping to feed, clothe and house people, both in Turkey, in Lebanon, in Jordan and elsewhere. I think she raises the important point about getting aid into Syria. More is being done on that, but it is extremely difficult because of the security situation. But we'll continue to do what we can.
Mr. Andrew Griffiths.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we mark the centenary of the First World War, it is a national disgrace that the graves of Victoria Cross winners lie crumbling and derelict. Can I congratulate the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State for Local Government as the patron of the Victoria Cross Trust for pledging £100,000 to help restore some of those graves, and the Sun newspaper for highlighting this campaign. As the government have pledged to match fund every penny raised by the Victoria Cross Trust, will the PM join me in urging people to go online, donate and ensure we have fitting memorials for the bravest of the brave?
Now, I certainly join the honourable gentleman who's a patron of the Victoria Cross Trust for the hard work that's being done, and also I think the Sun newspaper did a good job at highlighting the importance of this issue. My right honourable friend, the Community Secretary, has announced £100,000 funding for the Victoria Cross Trust, which he mentioned. This should go to restoring the graves of Victoria Cross recipients. We also have a programme for letting local authorities put up paving stones for people who won Victoria Crosses in their area, and we are looking at many other ways to commemorate this absolutely vital anniversary. I think the most important thing we're doing is the huge multi-million-pound investment going into the Imperial War Museum, which will open this summer, which I take my children to, and it brings the First World War to life in an extraordinary way, and that's at the heart of our important commemorations.
This is Emma Lewell-Buck.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My constituent, Darren Lugg's disability means he needs a specially adapted bed, so cannot share a room with his wife. Yet still they are hit by the bedroom tax. Can the Prime Minister explain why this government is punishing him for his disability?
Prime Minister.
Well, as the honourable lady knows, that we have the discretionary housing payments for exactly this sort of case, and the money has been topped up, so there's no reason for people to be disadvantaged in the way that she suggests.
David Rutley.
AstraZeneca is Macclesfield's largest employer with 2,000 employees, so I share constituents' concerns about Pfizer's proposed bids. I welcome the steps taken by the government to secure initial commitments from the company if it succeeds, but can my right honourable friend tell the House what further steps are being taken to strengthen those commitments and to safeguard highly skilled manufacturing jobs in Macclesfield?
Well, I'm grateful for my honourable friend's remarks. There are 2,000 people employed by AstraZeneca in his constituency, and he's quite right to speak up for them. Our entire approach is based upon trying to secure the best possible deal in terms of jobs, investment and science. And that is why I believe it was absolutely right to ask the Cabinet Secretary to engage with Pfizer, just as we're engaging with AstraZeneca. And I do find it extraordinary that we've been criticised for this. The commitments that have been made so far, and of course there is no offer on the table, but the commitments that are made so far are encouraging in terms of completing the Cambridge campus, making sure 20% of the combined company's total R&D workforce is in the UK going forward, and it specifically mentions substantial commercial manufacturing facilities in Macclesfield. It also goes on to say that because of the patent box that we've introduced, the company would look at manufacturing more in the UK. But let me be absolutely clear, I'm not satisfied. I want more. But the way to get more is to engage, not to stand up and play party politics.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the Prime Minister on a number of occasions has raised the important issue around awareness of mental health, and can I thank him for that. But can he explain why, since 2011, there's a 30% drop in mental health beds in the NHS? And is it really right that mental health patients are having to travel up to 200 miles to actually access a bed?
I think what matters in our NHS is the quality of provision and parity of esteem between physical health and mental health. And this government, we have not solved every problem, but we have put into the NHS constitution and the NHS mandate proper parity of esteem. We've also put in proper targets for some of the talking therapies that are absolutely vital in terms of mental health. Measuring the output of our NHS purely by the number of beds is not a sensible approach.
Ian Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The government is making a substantial investment in renewing and expanding the nation's infrastructure. There is, however, a real need to get more young people into engineering so that we will have the long-term skills base for these projects. Will my right honourable friend assure me that this government will do all it can to inspire the next generation of engineers?
Minister. No, I absolutely back what my honourable friend says, and I know he's been campaigning very hard to get the HS2 Academy to go to Milton Keynes, because there's a vital bit of skills work that needs to be done. I'm sure there'll be a lot of competition, but the key thing about these investments, whether it's Crossrail, whether it's the Olympics, whether it is HS2, is to plan in advance about the skills that we're going to need so we can fill them with British people leaving school and college wanting to take on those skills. Today, the Chancellor and the Minister for Schools have launched the Your Life, Your Choice campaign, which is all about encouraging young people to get into STEM subjects and to stay in STEM subjects, because there's a massive fall-off from GCSE to A-level, particularly in terms of physics, amongst young women, and we need to encourage them to go on studying.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted to see that the Prime Minister is wearing his Dementia Friends badge today, and he will congratulate the Alzheimer's Society in their commitment to get 1 million Dementia Friends over the next year. But will he also today commit personally to put an end to the scandal of 15-minute visits, of low wages and of 0 hours contracts for the dedicated home carers who look after people with dementia in our country?
First of all, let me praise the Right Honourable Lady for her work on dementia and the amount of work she's done to spread awareness about this. On the issue of 15-minute working times, this is an issue for local councils. My own local council has just decided to stop these 15-minute visits because they don't believe you can really get any meaningful work done. But I think it is for councils on 0 hours contracts. We're the first government to have a proper review into 0 hours contracts, and we're very unhappy about those with exclusivity clauses that don't allow you to work elsewhere. But I think as important as those things is to make sure that our care system has got people inside it that are really caring and understanding about the problems of dementia. She and I have both been through the very short Dementia Friend training course, and I don't know about her, but I think I'm ready for a refresher.
Neil Carmichael.
Mr. Speaker, with 1.3% growth in manufacturing in last quarter and some strong performances from my local firms such as Renishaw, Dairycrest, Lister, Shearing and others, largely through innovation, does the Prime Minister agree with me that one key element of the long-term economic plan is actually the need to improve, is actually the need to further strengthen our skills base so that these firms can continue to grow and work hard for Britain and generate exports?
Prime Minister.
No, well, my honourable friend is absolutely right that a key part of the long-term plan is to rebalance our economy away from purely the southeast and also towards manufacturing, exports and investment. And I know that he's been playing his part by running a festival for manufacturing and engineering in Stroud. I think this is really important because one of the things we've got to do is inspire a new generation to think of these careers and think of the subjects they should be studying in school and university to open up these careers for them.
Keith Vaz.
Mr. Speaker, last Thursday, the EU ban on the import of Indian mangoes took effect. As a result, hundreds of businesses in Leicester and throughout the UK will suffer millions of pounds of losses. There was no consultation with this House and no vote by British ministers. Next week, he'll be having his first conversation with a new Indian Prime Minister. Will he do his best to reverse this ban so we can keep the special relationship with India, which his predecessors and he have worked so hard to maintain, and so we can have our delicious mangoes once again?
Well, I know how much the right honourable gentleman cares about this, so much so that he delivered a tray of mangoes to number 10 Downing Street, missing the deadline, I might add, so that they could safely be consumed by people inside. And I'm very grateful for that. This is a very serious issue that the European Commission has to look on the basis of the science and the evidence. There are concerns about particular cross-contamination in terms of British crops and British interests, so we have to make sure that that is got right. But I understand how strongly he feels, how strongly the Indian community in this country feel, and indeed I look forward to discussing it with the new Indian Prime Minister.
Chris White.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Prime Minister join me in congratulating Vitsu, the world-class furniture manufacturer, on their decision to locate their manufacturing facility in Leamington and the jobs this will create? I am proud the decision was based in part on our community's rich industrial heritage. And will the Prime Minister also pay tribute to local businesses that have created jobs and reduced the number of JSA claimants in Warwick and Leamington by a remarkable 54% since May 2010?
I congratulate my honourable friend, for the decline in unemployment in his constituency is incredibly marked at 54%. It's notable what he says about furniture factories, because these are the sort of businesses that were going offshore. And what we're seeing in our country is a slow trend, but I want to encourage it, of reshoring, of getting businesses coming back to Britain, investing and expanding in Britain. We must do everything we can to encourage this, whether it is keeping their taxes down, keeping national insurance down, cutting national insurance for young people, training more apprentices and investing in infrastructure. That is what we'll do, so there are many more success stories like the one that he mentioned.
Nick Dakin. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Lorraine Seith's son has recently returned from serving our country in Afghanistan. Does the Prime Minister think it's right that she has to pay the bedroom tax to keep a room available for him to stay in when he's at home?
Minister! Let me look at this individual case, because we made a specific exemption for people who are serving overseas in terms of the spare room subsidy. If the spare room subsidy exemption doesn't apply in this case, of course there is the provision of the discretionary housing payments, which is another way of dealing with this, and I would hope that Scunthorpe Borough Council would take up that offer.
Simon Byrne. There will indeed be more, which is why we must hear the right honourable gentleman and then, at my request, others. And we are concerned also, I'm sure, about others. Mr. Simon Burns.
Oh! The Prime Minister will be aware that the service sector grew at its fastest level this year, last week, with the ensuing creation of jobs. Does he agree with me that this demonstrates that we must stick with the long-term economic plan because it is working, and I trust my right honourable friend has enough time to answer the question in full?
First of all, can I say to my right honourable friend that he's absolutely right. We have to stick to the long-term economic plan and deliver it. And perhaps I can say that for him to be called at 12:33 on a Wednesday shows that if you stick at anything, you can win.
I've always practised that philosophy myself. However long it takes, we're going to get through them. Kate Hoey.
The Prime Minister will know that recently it has gone into the public domain that over 365 people in Northern Ireland were given the royal prerogative of mercy, despite 10 years of files being lost as well. Could he give a commitment that these names will be made public? After all, if the Queen takes the time to sign 365 names, surely the public, and particularly the victims, have the right to know.
Well, what I would say to the honourable lady, who I know takes a very close interest in these issues in Northern Ireland, is that there were difficult decisions that were taken principally by the last government at the time of the various agreements that did involve, as I say, very difficult choices, hard choices that had to be made in order to try and build the platform for peace and reconciliation. I'm very happy to look at the specific points she says and see if there's anything I can do to reassure her in a letter, but I don't want to try and unpick decisions that were taken at a difficult time to try and give us the peace that we enjoy today.
Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chief Medical Officer warned last month that we're misusing antibiotics to such an extent that we risk returning in just a matter of years to the 19th century environment where routine operations carry a grave risk of death. A couple of days ago, the World Health Organization issued a similar warning saying we're hurtling towards the post-antibiotic age. On that basis, it surely is madness that we continue to allow so many antibiotics to be used on our factory farms, around half the total use in this country, when we know that that is contributing to resistance.
My honourable friend raises an extremely serious problem that is global in its nature and could have unbelievably bad consequences in terms of antimicrobial resistance, leading to actually quite minor ailments not being properly treatable. One of the problems is that the current ways that research is done by pharmaceutical companies is not necessarily bringing forward new antibiotics in the way that we need or solving this problem. I've met with the Chief Medical Officer to discuss this. I think there's a number of steps that we can take here in the UK and working with other countries, and I hope to be saying something about it soon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Secretary of State for Business, Innovation and Skills said that he was working with civil servants to ensure that any assurances given by Pfizer during the proposed takeover of AstraZeneca could be made legally binding. Does the Prime Minister back this?
As I said, the more we can do to strengthen the assurances we are given, the better. But the only way you'll get assurances is by engaging and getting stuck in with those companies, which is what we've been doing. And I find it extraordinary that the Labour Party chooses to criticise us for that.
Last but not least, Dr. Julian Huppert.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Pfizer bid for AstraZeneca is driven by tax advantages. Has the Prime Minister spoken to the US government if they propose any changes to their tax law? And have Pfizer asked for any changes to our tax system, particularly to the patent box?
So Pfizer mentioned in their letter to me, they do mention the patent box as a positive reason for wanting to invest in Britain and actually to examine whether they could increase manufacturing in Britain. Because, of course, the way the patent box works is you only get the low tax benefit if you make your investments and research in the UK and then actually exploit that research by manufacturing in the UK. But I agree with him, we should be incredibly hard-headed about this. It's an advantage that Britain is a low-tax country. We used to stand in this House of Commons and bemoan the fact that companies were leaving because of our high taxes. They now want to come here because of our tax system. But I agree with the Business Secretary, that is not enough. We want the investment, the jobs and the research that comes with that competitive tax system.
Order.